Welcome to It's Not So Black and White, a podcast where we explore difficult topics with a desire to understand why we think and feel the way we do. I'm your host, Coach John McClernand, and each episode I bring you a guest who brings a challenging topic for us to shine a light on. This podcast is also broadcast live on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So on whatever platform you follow myself, Coach John McClernand, you have the opportunity to participate in this discussion during the live stream. We encourage your participation both by commenting and asking questions. This podcast is about exploring the human experience behind the ideas with compassion and critical thinking. So let's dive in. All right, welcome back to what is a solo cast with a guest because my co-hosts again, well, one of them just had a baby, so I think that's a pretty valid excuse. Like literally at the time of recording, his wife just gave birth, so I was like, that's a pretty valid excuse.
We'll give him a pass this time.
Yeah. This one time. So I am very pleased to have with me Josh Zepess. Is that the correct emphasis on the right syllables?
Sounds good to me. I've been called far worse, so I'll take that.
Who goes by the identity archaeologist in his professional life, which is a pretty cool title and a very unique one. I haven't heard anybody else use that title, so you're the only one. Before we dive into tonight's topic, we might as well find out what is an identity archaeologist?
Oh, that's a great question. It's someone who has no competition, as you just so aptly described. But which, by the way, is a pretty cool place to be in business, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, it's my process. It's how I dig deep into a person, find their uniqueness, get rid of all that crap, baked on, caked on conditioning, pull that uniqueness to the surface, brush it off, and then polish it and refine it till it shines so bright. All their ideal prospects come from thousands of miles to come see them. So it's about being magnetically attractive in business and no longer having to chase, beg, convince, and sell in the classic sense.
Yeah, which is really cool. I think that's a unique gift that you have, plus a super needed quality in the business world. But tonight we're actually going to talk about another idea that you had, which was, this you shared with me when we chatted last, this idea of a minimum standard of living. One of the things we're kind of facing here is this unprecedented, I think it's unprecedented, economic sort of uncertainty in the 21st century, which, we had the Great Recession in 2008, and we've had some sort of economic turbulence since then. But what we have seen over the last couple of years through the pandemic and whatnot is really like probably the largest single transfer of wealth in human history, move from like sort of the average citizen to a series of corporations. And now with inflation hitting record highs, it's seeming like the average person is just being squeezed harder and harder and wondering like, how am I going to make this work?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're right. Wealth is moving towards corporations and oligarchs. Mm-hmm. We are seeing some of the richest individuals that history has ever seen, even inflation adjusted. And oligarchs are another whole I don't know, maybe it fits into what we're going to talk about here, but we could talk about oligarchy and
I just jotted down the term oligarch in my notebook here. I was like, hey, well, let's define that, because I think that term gets thrown around a little bit and maybe sometimes not entirely correctly, but we might as well just define oligarchy and what an oligarch is for those who might be wondering.
Basically, that my simplest way to describe it is a person who has very heavy political influence, often due to wealth, but they are not elected. So it's an unelected individual with excessive influence on
by virtue
of their wealth or something. Usually it's wealth, usually it's money, which if you want to get even more specific, that's more like a plutocracy, where it's really more wealth-based. Yeah.
Right. And we can think about, let's pick on Jeff Bezos, because he's, I don't know, number 2 or number 3 at this point in time.
Yeah.
Which you bear these ever so slight, some similar physical characteristics. I'm not going to say an entirely.
It's the bald head. That's all it is. Come on, it's just the bald.
But he owns like the Washington Post, and so when you own like a news outlet, you can, especially one that probably has fairly widespread distribution, you can really use that to shape narratives. And on the other hand, of course, he's also, although I think he stepped down recently, did he not? But has been for the better part of 20 years the CEO of Amazon, and made them one of the largest companies in the world. And on the backs of what is, I hesitate to use the term, but like getting very close sometimes to what I would call slave labor when you look at the actual working conditions. And so that the cost of that 2-day delivery or 1-day delivery has been pretty significant.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And then also our favorite oligarch of late is
Um,
Elon Musk with Twitter and some of the things he's doing there.
yeah,
So
well, that's kind of a so, but I think of all the oligarchs, I think Elon is the least. I don't want to say stable because it's not the right word, but I think he has the most paper wealth, based in potentially inflated stock prices in his companies, and so on paper he's the wealthiest man in the world. However, that could evaporate in a relatively short fashion.
it could, and I think that's also why he's trying to back out of the Twitter deal. He's trying to find some reason to get out without having to pay the fine or get into legal jeopardy.
Mm.
Uh,
Well, I thought that was a really interesting play on his part. Do you think this was deliberate? Like, did he expect to fail of his purchase? I mean, as if you can read his mind. I'm just asking, like, since you're the identity archaeologist and maybe you study human beings, do you think he really thought this was going to go through successfully?
I think he meant for it to go through, and then I think at least our stock market here really took kind of a tank right after he made that announcement, and the value of Twitter is just not what it used to be. So I think he
Mm.
overbid. I think that's truly what happened, and he realized, crap, I'm paying too much. I don't want to pay this much for this muffler. I don't want to pay too much for my muffler, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm overpaying for this, and then the analysis of bots on the platform became like, this is the reason I'm backing out, sort of thing. And I mean, look, it wouldn't surprise. Surely he had an idea beforehand, but that
Of course,
became
and he signed it. He signed a due diligence that he says, I'm waiving any additional due diligence beyond what was presented to him at the time. So legally, he doesn't have much to stand on.
right.
Uh,
So at worst, he pays a bill. But I mean, let's say he pays $1 billion fine and then
yeah,
turns around and oh, you know what? Actually, maybe we'll purchase for 30 billion instead of what 42 or 43 or whatever.
yeah. But again, the whole point here is
Mm,
this one person has
yes.
incredible and excessive influence in what is supposed to be a democracy,
Yes.
and that can go wrong very quickly.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, it's like he has, and it's funny. I don't mind getting a little bit sidetracked here, but I just think of what sort of some of his ambitions are with regards to AI, with regards to, I guess, transhumanism. I'm not sure if
Hmm.
he totally fits, but with Neuralink and sort of transhumanism, or uh, what's the other term? Like not cyborg, but there's another term for sort of meshing humans with machines and computers that escapes my brain right now. I
Just
blame
pick one of the movies. That's a kind of which movie is the best analogy in that.
RoboCop, or yeah.
RoboCop. There you go. Perfect.
Yeah. So he's got those because a lot of people on the right side of the political spectrum were really cheering for Elon in this case, because they felt like he was going to sort of open up the floodgates and allow them to express their views.
Yeah, I don't think that was going to be the case. And
Mhm,
I wrote about this a little bit, but I think Elon's in a tough spot. Yes, he calls it free speech, but
mhm,
first of all,
mhm,
free speech isn't free. Um, Twitter, I think, has done a decent job, not perfect, and they've made some mistakes and they've owned those mistakes, but they've done a decent job of kind of following our constitutional guidelines on free speech, on the
mhm.
First Amendment. Not perfectly, but to some
Right.
idea where it's like if it's really hateful and it's driving violence or inciting violence, they did get rid of stuff like that, and they did it on the left and the right. And I've got data. I've got a whole study that someone did analysis of which accounts got banned, and it was almost they almost gave deference to the right. They almost let them they gave them a longer leash than they did on the left, which I thought was really
Interesting.
fascinating.
Because it seems to be
Um,
the perception of it is
yeah.
exactly the opposite of that.
It is. Well, the narrative is different for sure. Uh, but I don't believe because what's going to happen is if he allows people to incite violence, if he allows a lot of misinformation, he's going to lose users, and that's a business loser. That's not good for business.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
I expect he's going to toe the same or similar line to what Twitter's already doing. I don't think there's going to be a big change if he ends up buying it. Otherwise, he's just willing to lose a crap ton of money and run a thing into the ground.
Yeah. Someone actually requests, "Hey, does this program take calls?" Well, actually, what we do is
Oh,
if you leave comments, you can be a part of the conversation and you can ask questions. But we don't have people jump in on screen. Although that could be an interesting idea for this show
hey,
as
that
well.
could be interesting.
You just never know what you're going to get. So, yeah, you mentioned something else. This idea of incite violence, and I think that's sort of a I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, "Ooh, I feel a bit squirrely about that," to say that someone's words can be blamed for another person acting violently. And so how could say a tweet be actually responsible for violence that others carry out?
I don't know that. Okay, so let's frame this a little bit. I don't think a
Okay,
single tweet can do
fair enough.
that.
Right.
I
Okay.
think when you talk about what we have in this country, what was in Germany in the 30s, and what we have now, what we're seeing is the big lie. So
Okay.
when you take a lie that's really massive, like there was voter fraud, and that's why your team lost the election, and you repeat it over and over and over, and then you do a tweet on January 5th or January 4th this last year
Mm,
that it's all Pence's fault. The vice president doesn't have the guts to go ahead and send the electors back and accept an alternate slate of electors that will elect Trump president again. When you do stuff like that, yes, you can actually incite violence because people feel like they were robbed. They feel like their only outlet is now to rise up against the government and take back control, blah, 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 whatever you want to say. So it's over time, but it's not a single tweet by itself in isolation,
mhm.
right?
Yeah. So, but the interesting thing about it, because I'll not, I'm saying I'm going to push back ever so slightly, play a bit of devil's advocate here.
Please.
I don't think that any election is ever free from foul play, if I could put it that way.
Correct.
And so when we call it like the big lie, I'm like, the problem is probably there is like a thread of truth in it. There are some elements that are true, but obviously they've been exaggerated to probably a fairly extreme level. But my take on it is I think pretty much every election every election is being played, but and maybe Trump had an idea of what was going on and tried to use it to his advantage. But I feel like every election is rigged in a sense. It almost doesn't feel like there's actually, and maybe that's a cynical view. Uh,
Yeah, and that's a
I'm
different.
open to
That's
being corrected, but
Yeah. Here's the problem with that. The elections are run at a local level in the
right,
U.S. And to coordinate all those people to do, to kind of make that happen is really, really difficult. And
probably
sure,
why the system was set up the way it was.
yeah. And now, are there mistakes made? Yes,
Yeah,
because we're humans, and humans always make mistakes. But we have a lot of checks and balances. We have a lot of double checks and triple checks and all this kind of stuff. But the stuff that Trump was claiming was just outrageous, huge amounts, tens and hundreds of thousands of votes were
right.
being
So to get to that
and
level of
we looked at it. We actually examined, and there was a lot of independent folks that came in that even Trump hired that says, no, man, there's just no fraud here, not at
right,
any
yeah,
significant level, like single digits, not thousands
right,
or millions of people uh, committing
yeah.
fraud. So at some point, we just have to say, look, it wasn't fraudulent. We have to move on. Uh,
But people
and
don't want to, because I mean,
yeah,
truthfully, I'm ever so slightly being Canadian. I'm ever so slightly ignorant about the whole thing. I was like, again, sometimes it feels like watching this oversized reality TV show south of the border. Like
you're
it's
welcome. How's that for entertainment?
yeah, yeah, but well, actually, let's swing it around then to this other term that we talked about before we went live, and there's this term of civility, and
Yeah,
you're working with someone on a project where you're actually redefining the word civility, because we're in a sense, like one of the things we talk about on this platform is civil discourse. So the ability to discuss difficult topics in a reasonable fashion where it doesn't degenerate into, you're a fascist pig or whatever people, I'm
yeah.
like, whatever the insults they throw around these days. I'm sure there's some that both sides have that they throw at each other, but
I'm always coming up with new ones just for fun. I don't use them too often, but they are fun. Yeah, no, so civility, when I researched civility, the root of the word, it basically stemmed from ancient Greece, and it meant the role and responsibility of being a citizen. It
Hmm,
was civility was tied to being a citizen and doing what you should do, doing what you need to do to promote a good society. And I looked at the definition when I started this project. I was like, what does civility mean now? And it means politeness in conversation. And I was like, oh my God, we just literally watered down civility to something completely meaningless compared to the richness and the depth of what do you need to do as a good citizen to support your society and to grow society in the right way, do the right thing.
yeah.
Uh,
So
yeah,
So and really it's meant to be kind of one of the I say one of the cornerstones, but there's only usually one cornerstone in the building. But like say a key pillar of democracy, maybe I can use that analogy, is the ability to have civil discourse around difficult issues, which means that you can actually effectively debate without it degenerating into ad hominem or personal attacks, where you attack the person as opposed to the issue, with the hope is that both sides of whoever is debating, the goal is to get to some form of common ground where we accept these are the compromises we have to be willing to make as we move towards this common shared goal of bettering our nation.
Yes, and if we can come to common ground and compromise, that's fine. If we can't, that's okay too.
Interesting.
That's okay. So when we live, if your system of government is democracy, the majority does get to rule on the larger issues of society, and you don't have to like it. If you're in the minority, you don't like it. That's what we have to do. At some point, we're all in the minority on a certain topic,
Sure. Yeah.
and that's kind of, so we don't even have to compromise on everything, but we do need to compromise in general and understand that, look, if the majority of people wanted blue ice cream to be the national flavor or something or whatever, like, okay,
Yeah.
I don't eat blue ice cream, and that's not for me, but fine, we'll do that. But we have to be able to hear each other out, listen
Hmm.
intently, have that discourse, disagree on the issue, attack the issue, tear the issue up, but still walk out of there as citizens.
Hmm.
In other
Hmm.
words, we have to believe the other person has as good intention as we do. And
Right.
that's the tough part, right?
Right. And we use this word democracy, and it would seem to me that, like, with your bipartisan system you have in the US,
Yeah.
where there's really only two viable political parties, there isn't really a third
Yeah, that's the
alternative,
problem.
which
Yeah.
is too bad because I really like Andrew Yang and I want him to come on the show sometime to talk about his forward party. That'd be really interesting. Do you really have a democracy when it feels like they're kind of doing the same thing because they're both using governmental power to extract wealth from your population and put it in the pockets of corporations?
Yeah. It's a stunted democracy for sure. Yeah, I agree with you on that. And I'm not a fan of the two-party system
Mm,
whatsoever, but we're stuck with it because of something called the Electoral College.
right.
Uh,
S- like, in your eyes, because I'm somewhat ignorant of the U.S. government. I have a sort of a vague understanding of it, but it seems to be this really complex system, which was probably partly deliberate again to try to introduce checks and balances to any one person holding too much power. Probably didn't foresee sort of the level of oligarch class that was going to develop in the 21st century. But um, do you ever see a way that this would ever go beyond a two-party system, or do they simply wield too much power as it is?
it's by definition, the structure of the Electoral College does not allow for a third party, uh, a third major party.
Hmm.
You can have as many parties as you want, but there's only going to be two major parties and stay a democracy. So
Interesting.
we have to abolish the Electoral College. Once we do that and we go to sort of like a ranked choice vote, which is what I would like to see,
Hmm.
a popular vote, but using ranked choice. And that would allow anybody with a good idea, anybody with a good heart to really step up and have a chance. Now, there's other reforms that have to happen too. By
Right.
itself, that's probably not going to be enough. We're probably going to have to do public funding
Sure.
of
Yeah.
elections and things like that.
So, for those who might not understand, what exactly is meant by ranked choice?
Oh, I'm probably not the best person to describe it.
Because, like, in Canada,
Uh,
we have a multi-party system, and it's like we call it like first past the post, essentially. And so it's whatever candidate gets the most number of votes in that one riding, that one political riding, gets that seat. But you could theoretically win enough ridings to uh, win like a majority in terms of seats in our parliament. But on the flip side, not have won the popular vote because maybe another party in certain like vote rich areas gets a lot of votes, but it doesn't really translate into enough seats to have a majority government. So because the one issue that people would probably raise with this idea of a popular vote is that, okay, then you're going to have like Texas, California, New York,
yeah,
Florida. I'm trying to list like the most populous
yeah,
states, and I think
yeah, yeah.
they're going to decide for the entire country. And so, how do someone living in Texas has no idea what someone in Iowa, what's helpful for them, or doesn't even care because there's more people in probably in San Antonio than there is in the state of Iowa for all
That's
I
a
know.
false concern on many levels, to be
Okay.
honest. So ranked choice. Let me see if I can describe this just really clumsily. You decide your first place person,
Oh, okay. Right.
second
Yeah.
place, third place, and each one is weighted. So first place is weighted more, and then when you add up all the votes, the person with the highest weighting,
Okay, so like
basically
number one is 10 points, number two is 8 points, number three is 6 points, or however they decide to weight the
something
system.
like that. Yeah,
And then
yeah,
the candidate that gets the most number of points, it may even ultimately not necessarily be the top number of first place,
no,
but the number of overall points becomes the candidate for that. Now, this is
correct.
another one I'd kind of like to explore. Then is this idea, this false, what is it, false fear? Did you say of like say the tyranny of like say New York, California, Texas, and Florida dictating for the rest of the country
Yeah.
how things are going to go? Why is that false?
So for a couple of reasons. One, first of all, voting for the national president is the only place the electoral college is, right?
Mhm.
So when you look at state presidents, so every state has a president. We call them governors, but they're actually
Sure. Yeah.
state
Yeah.
presidents. They have the same House and Senate, the exact same governmental structure,
Okay.
and every state has a popular vote. Every state, they don't break it up by county. They don't do any
Right.
kind
Right.
of
Right.
electoral college magic. It's all just straight popular vote. And guess what? Every state works fantastic.
So you
So
already have this system
we
in
already
play.
have it.
The
We
only
already
place it's
have it.
not in
It's
play
only
is
on
if
the president. But here's the thing. If the president is supposed to preside over the entire country, why is it not one person, one vote, no matter where you live? And remember, national president over all 50 states.
Mhm.
Why would you make it more complex? Why not have the one person, one vote, one citizen, one vote, uh, regardless of where they live? That's
So then let's say again, so people would say, okay, well, everyone in New York, like the four states I'm listing, I don't know if they are the four most populous, but I got to think like California, New York, Texas, and Florida are right
yeah,
up there, anyways. Um, they might determine who the president is, but are you saying the state governance system means
the
that
same way.
it's sort of but does that balance things out? Does that mean the governor has enough voice or power or whatever to maybe balance out what might be coming down from a federal level?
Yeah. So the governor would be, yeah, the governor would basically be ruled by, or whatever the majority in that state is. If it's a big city in that state, then yeah, the governor would be that same political party more than likely.
Mhm,
Not
mhm.
always.
So you
Um,
only have to campaign in like, if you're in Pennsylvania, you only have to campaign in what, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and you can basically win and ignore the rest of the state.
but that's how it is now, if you think about it. So electoral college is also weighted based on population. That's
Fair enough.
that's the electors are proportionate to population. So right now, candidates go to about 10 different states out of the 50. That's really about it.
Right,
So
because it would
that's
be
not even going
impossible
to
to go
change
to all
much.
of them. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, but I think, we also have to remember that at the national level, we're all the same. We're all US citizens. And
Mhm.
because we have these arbitrary political borders, state borders, to me, I don't see why we should make anything more complex. Now, I know why the Electoral College came into existence in the first place, and it was basically a kind of a minority rule. They wanted minority states that were slaveholder states to have enough representation when it came to choosing the president. So I understand the original intent. I just don't think
Okay.
it's applicable. Well, it really wasn't a good idea back then, in my opinion,
Sure.
but
Yeah. Right.
it's certainly not applicable today. Um, when we have such a small country. When I say small, like we can travel faster, information flows faster.
Yeah.
We don't really have the same challenges we had back then. Um, so,
Right. Yeah.
but
Where
plus it would
where
open up for ranked choice voting, which ultimately is what I would like to see
for which choice voting?
for
Sorry.
the ranked choice for the popular vote.
Ranked choice voting. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Um, so then, if we think about, if we go back to sort of the oligarch class, the transfer of wealth, the basically seeing the government right now, or basically what looks like the government being a structure for extracting wealth from the population, putting it in the pockets of corporations, and that sort of points to the brokenness of the U.S.
yeah.
political system. Um, you've put forward this idea of a minimum standard of living, and I'd like to explore that idea a little bit more. And I think you're putting this forward as an alternative to universal basic income. Is that correct?
That's correct. That is
Yeah.
correct.
Do you want to just share a little bit of your idea around MSL? Because I imagine you've chewed on this idea quite a bit.
I have actually, yeah. So here's the challenge with using money as an equalizer, which is what UBI does and what
Right.
minimum wage does, is that wealth is generational. So Elon Musk, perfect example. His daddy owned an emerald mine down in South Africa. He was driven to school in Rolls Royces. He did not start poor. Now he
Right.
did a lot. He took a lot of risks and he did a lot of great things. I'm not trying to take that away from him, but he didn't start on a dirt floor. He didn't start with a single mom working 5 jobs.
Mm.
So wealth and the preponderance and the building of wealth in our country is very generational. So when you've got people that can't feed themselves, when they have uh, they don't have the ability to pay for the mortgage or keep the lights on, things like that, they don't have a chance. This American exceptionalism that oh,
Mm-mm.
anyone can do anything in our country, that's kind of BS.
You want to talk about a big
So
lie?
that is a huge lie. And of course, is it possible? Yes, but so is winning the lottery. Anything is
Right.
technically possible. But if you don't have money to start with, you're at a severe disadvantage. So what I want to do is I want to take money out of the equation completely. Not completely, I shouldn't say that, but money out of the equation when it comes to standard of living. So every citizen gets housing, medical, food. We'll start there, right? Housing,
Sure.
medical, and food. And by the way, my opinion, the way I came up with this, I'm a big fan of Maslow, Abraham Maslow.
Hmm. Hmm.
And if you read his deeper stuff, not just the hierarchy of human needs, that's part of it, but he talks about deficiency needs and B values. So deficiency values and B values. And he says, if you can't feed yourself, if you don't have a roof over your head, if you don't have the basics to survive, you'll never appreciate to the higher levels of love, society, belonging, contribution, all of
Mm.
these things that we would love to see our citizens do, right? Ideally.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, minimum standard of living is not just a feel good. It's not just, oh, Josh, you're just so nice. You just want everyone to have the food on their table. No, 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 no. This is an economic proposition.
Right.
We've got how many millions of people do we have here that have food insecurity, that are struggling to pay the rent, that if they can just have some level of meeting those D values, they can start being contributing members. They can
Hmm.
maybe open up businesses. They can go find the higher end jobs. They can do things to contribute to our GDP.
Hmm.
And then if you want to work beyond this MSOL, that's where money comes in. So I'm not getting rid of money, but money's a reward for going above and beyond just existing. MSOL, if
Right.
you're a citizen, you get it, right?
Right.
You want more than this? You want more than just the standard? Go for it. Work your ass off, climb the
Right.
ladder, American dream, hooray.
So it's kind of like I don't know if social capitalism is the right term. I'm trying to equate it a little bit, but just say like,
Wait,
because right now it's not like America doesn't have enough wealth to make sure every citizen of the U.S. has housing and
that's
food
right.
and
We do.
clothing. Like the wealth exists,
You-
but it's in the hands of the 0.1% that they're controlling a disproportionate amount of that wealth. And we could argue potentially that it's been extracted off the back because of the imbalance of power. They can extract that wealth off of the labor of people, and we hold them
Right.
up and celebrate them like, look at this great CEO doing all these. And it's like this exists off the back of like people working in factories and plants who are in like near death conditions at times. In fact, people have died in these working conditions, and so to really be able to say, like, I get all the credit because I'm a visionary, it's like your company doesn't exist without the labor of all these people, and they're not
That's right.
being paid a fair proportion of the profit. So, how do you? I think probably one of the questions would be, how do you propose to finance something like this?
Absolutely. By the way, to what you just said, I just saw a quote today that was fantastic. Is it about time that we start um, realizing that exorbitant profits in companies are simply unpaid wages? It was phrased something like that, which is exactly what you
Mm,
just said. It was like, ooh, that is
yeah,
juicy. I really
yeah,
enjoyed that.
yeah.
So how do we finance this? So first of all, just look at our defense budget our defense budget alone. Oh boy, what was it last time I looked? I'm 300 billion, 400 billion, and we're not fighting anyone. But we have
Right,
money. We have money a lot of places. Um, so we do have the resources to do it. We just don't want to. We don't have
right.
the incentive to do it. So I don't think it's such a money issue. However, I do believe in making investment that has an ROI. I'm not just saying we throw money at it and
Hmm. Hmm.
whatever taxes go there. I truly believe there's an ROI here, that if we get more people not having to worry about where their next meal's coming from, they can be and will be, because human nature is to grow, right? We're curious, we
Right.
want to
Yes.
build
Yeah.
ourselves up, we want better things for our family. We're going to go work harder. We're going to create more things. We're going to have more innovation. We're going to have more businesses open, especially small businesses. And I think that's going to generate more tax revenue. That's going to generate more GDP.
Mhm.
And that's going to feed back into this system. But we need the impetus, right? We need that investment to get this set up.
Yeah. And so, and I think that where people will push back is exactly this. Like someone who hasn't, let's say, the argument would be something along the lines of, well, they haven't worked for this. You're trying to take something that I've worked for and that I've built up, and that person hasn't worked for it, and I'm expected to hand whatever I've worked for over to this lazy person who hasn't worked for it. And I don't buy into that argument, but I suspect this is some of the pushback you would get.
And that's the problem. The psyche of this country is that if someone is poor, it's because they're lazy.
Mm,
But let me tell you something, poverty, and I just wrote an article on this, poverty is man-made. Poverty does not exist in nature. We actually create poverty within a society, because only a society can make resources scarce. So when someone's in poverty, at least in this country, and I imagine in some others, it's not because poverty is not about not having stuff.
mhm.
We need to redefine poverty. It's not about not having stuff. It's not having access to get that stuff. And there's a world of difference between those two things. But
Right.
so I go back to generational wealth. A lot of people are poor because their parents were poor, and they're in this cycle. It's not that they don't want to work hard, is they're working 3 jobs and they're
Right.
still
Yeah.
poor.
So
So
so that
they're not lazy. That's
right,
the
and
that's the
there's an
challenge.
argument to be made that, or something along the lines of the rich people want to keep the poor people poor. And that's a very sort of that's kind of a blunt way of putting it. And I understand that's a
Yeah.
very overgeneralized kind of statement, but maybe it's a starting point.
Yeah, yeah. I know. I in general, uh, I don't think it's an evil thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think the wealthier folks or people that have that influence just see people as human batteries, and it's like, look, I'm gonna plug you in here. I'm gonna use up your energy, and when you run out of energy, I'm gonna throw you out, and I'm gonna plug in the next person. And
Right.
this is the
Yeah.
corporate machine. This is how you keep, companies running. So I don't think it's an evil intent. I think it's callous, right? Which is different. It's more
Hmm.
of an
Yeah.
indifferent kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
callousness.
Yeah. As opposed to a deliberate malice. This is
Yeah. I don't think
yeah.
it's malice. I just think it's
Hmm.
like, well, these people aren't worth much. They're poor. Who the hell is going to even think about them or care about them? Meanwhile, you've got some geniuses down there that can't feed themselves. And heck, they're not going to create art. They're not going to let
Right.
that
Right.
genius out. So I think we have so much untapped potential
Right.
in
Yeah.
below the poverty line that a UBI doesn't quite address, because it's still money based. We
Right.
have to give them those resources to eat, right? They
Mhm.
shouldn't be worried about their next meal or a
Could
roof over their head.
could it be argued that a UBI would still keep people trapped in poverty?
Yes, I think it can. Because at what level, how much money?
Mhm.
When's how much money do they get? And what could it be used for? And again, I don't think money solves this problem.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
think UBI can definitely trap people into poverty still.
Right. So when we're talking minimum standard of living, are we talking like government built housing so that everyone has the option of being housed? These days I think the term for homeless folks is like the unhoused population or something along those lines. And I suppose we could say, okay, what about those who choose not to accept this? At that point, do we say, okay, well, this has become a choice, or um, let's say we'll start with housing. How do we house people under this
Yeah,
system?
this is a fascinating question, to be honest, because I do wonder if we offer housing for free, and it's decent housing, right? It's
Mhm.
clean,
Mhm.
it's not fancy. I've seen some amazing things with like these big 3D printers where you can create these buildings for very low cost. Uh, but I wonder how many people would still choose to be homeless. I don't have an answer to that. I
Right. Yeah.
really don't know. I would imagine to be small percentage, but I don't know. Maybe. And here's the other challenge then that goes along with this is poverty is also a mentality.
Mhm.
You know, you can give someone money, but if they have a poverty mindset, the money's gone. right?
Right, and we can see that in lottery winners that, let's
Yes,
say they just their spending habits didn't change, just what they were spending on changed.
that's right. 70% are broke within 5 years.
And
Lottery winners.
is that still a stat going into like 2022 when this is an understood phenomenon where you can say, okay, we're gonna drip feed you this money, or I guess if people take a full payout, and maybe the incentive is if you take a full payout, we're gonna slash these winnings in half to incentivize you to rather just be like set for life instead.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. This is as of a few years ago when I looked
Mhm.
at it. Um, but yeah, I think they're doing more of the annuity thing now, where they're just going to give you so much per year for the rest of your life, which I think is very smart,
Right. Yeah.
at least. But
And that
the
could
idea, but
create
going back to
interesting
what we're
case
talking
studies.
about is the mentality, right? So
Yeah.
even if you offer housing,
Yeah.
are people in the right mentality? So we're going to have to help them and educate them. Because remember, when you don't have housing, that's not your only problem. You
Mhm.
probably do have food insecurity. You probably were mal-educated, uh, and you probably have very low self-esteem,
Mhm.
very low self-worth. So there's this has to be a comprehensive approach. So you can't break it into pieces. You can't say, oh,
Right.
let's try housing and see if it works. Let's try food and see if it works. It's not going to work. It's got to be the entire person. We have to treat the entire person. Otherwise, this falls apart.
Mhm. And would we, when you think about implementation, like to try to implement on a federal or a national scale, I think would be like monstrously like problematic. Would it be something that you would say, okay, let's try this. Let's pick like one of the least populous states and give this a go as a pilot project and see how this works. I'm picking on like Iowa because I just imagine them not being that populous. I have no idea what their population is, but
I don't know.
I imagine it's not a whole lot, you know?
It's not one of the more populous states. It's probably
Yeah.
somewhere, I'd say middle. It's probably somewhere in the middle,
Or maybe like
lower middle.
Wyoming. Wyoming's got to be near the bottom.
That's got to be near the bottom. Yeah. Yeah.
So how would you go about testing this?
Well, and the other question is how many homeless are in Wyoming because it's low
Right, yeah.
population. So I think you'd have to pick an urban area. Uh, that'd just be my initial inclination, but I could definitely be talked out of that into something different. Uh, you would have to have something that's got a significant population because I think the more population density, the easier it would be to implement because you got
Right.
people in a smaller geographic location as opposed to spread out.
Mm.
Uh, but yeah, I guess you could do a pilot with
Because
that.
like, California has more people than Canada, which is
Yeah,
crazy
that's
to think
true.
about, right? So I probably wouldn't pick them as like the pilot state to try this, and although they do have a monstrous homeless problem apparently down there.
They do.
Uh,
It's really bad.
yeah,
Um,
almost a side question. Maybe we'll put that in the shiny object store, but your thoughts on how they've generated such a homeless population, or what's created that? But
yeah. I mean, the cost of living is outrageous. Below you, 6 figures. If you're making less than 6 figures, you're in the poverty line. You're below the poverty line. You're
interesting.
not. You don't
Yeah.
have a house. You're maybe affording rent. Maybe the food's not so bad, but the housing is unbelievably expensive.
Right. And so, because I think I've been hearing rumblings about like lootings and like just people smashing grabs, like this sort of petty criminality on the rise, and particularly on the rise in states like California, where they've taken a more lenient approach to crime. But could it be argued then that some of this behavior is happening as a result of poverty, and that if you so in terms of food, would it be something like you can go into a store, you don't have to pay for the food, maybe there's a limit on how much you can take out of the store, but
Yeah.
and you're literally just scanning inventory kind of thing. Okay, like this is your weekly allotment or something like that.
Yeah, it could be credits. It could
Mhm.
be kind of a food stamp kind of program, um, or it could be, yeah, it could be something else. It could be where the food does get delivered, like we would do Uber Eats or anything like
Right,
that,
right,
where it's
right.
just, all right, here it is. Here's your groceries. You can order it online. Here's your groceries delivered right to your apartment. Uh, but remember, there's always this option where you can still work. If
Right.
and anything you earn from your job goes towards higher level things. It
Right.
doesn't have to
Okay.
go towards food and all this other stuff. So there's still this upward mobility, which I think is really important because that goes to the critics that say, well, these people aren't working, they're getting all this free stuff. Yeah, but they're not living like the
Not
lavish
living high on the
lifestyle.
hog here. Yeah. Yeah.
No, not at all. But if they wanted to become an author, they can live on this stuff and they can start writing a book. If they want to become a doctor, They can go get a loan for college or go find a way to get a scholarship, and they can actually go and attend classes without worrying about where their next meal is coming from.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's just allows, but this is the scary part. This brings us closer to the M word, which it scares a lot of folks in this country, and that's called meritocracy.
Yeah, this one, boy, because that one can generate some pushback as well. Because of course, then we get into like the D word
The
of
privilege.
discrimination, privilege, that sort of thing, right? So
Yeah.
this idea of America, like, because we could say, well, you're smarter than me, so it's not fair. But that sounded like kind of snide to put it that way. But as though I imagine that's how people would speak about it. But maybe there is kind of that idea. But in the same token, it's like, do we move our society forward? And here's where there's a bit of maybe a back and forth and tug of war, because you could say, well, someone like Elon Musk is like an innovative thinker. Now,
Mhm.
uh, I have my own sort of side thoughts that he's a little bit of a fraud as well. But that
Yeah,
that that
yeah, yeah. He's
that's
his father says he's just a spoiled child. So I think
right.
it just comes from this. He's got this.
That's an opinion piece. I can't really,
Yeah.
verify that, but it's like he didn't really start Tesla and PayPal and things like that.
Mm-mm. He bought him.
He's yeah, he worked his
Well, he
way
bought
it.
Tesla. Yeah,
Mhm, mhm.
yeah.
But he gets the credit despite not necessarily being the inventor of these things. And maybe he goes in there and thinks, "Oh, I have a better idea of how I could, utilize these resources or whatever." And so maybe he gets some credit that way. But yeah, I again, that's probably why I feel like he's much more paper wealth than anybody else in the oligarch
Yeah. Have you ever
class.
wondered, is Elon Musk the Elon Musk we know today if he were born poor? If he didn't have, even if he made it to the US, right, from South
Mhm, mhm.
Africa, and but he didn't have these resources. Does he still do what he did? Does he still have success, or is he just a nobody, just like a lot of other folks have been? I just,
Like actually Nikola Tesla,
yeah, yeah.
who was
I don't
filled
think he's
with
even that. I don't think he's an inventor. Like at least Nikola Tesla actually invented this stuff,
true.
and yeah, he gave it away, and he was just way too nice about it, and got
Yeah.
kind of
Oh, this
little
Marconi
tricks.
fella's a nice guy. He can have
Yeah,
that patent,
yeah, exactly. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't know that Elon Musk actually had these ideas and had this inventive spirit about him.
Mhm, mhm.
So again, it just goes to what we're saying. Like without the wealth to start with, what can you be?
Right. So, but I mean, maybe the hope is that some of these kids who grow up with generational wealth, these so-called trust fund kids, that they're done with money and so it somehow gets dumped back into the economy. But I mean, imagine like, look, you're set up with a trust fund where, like, for the rest of your life, you never have to worry about how you're going to make a living because
Right.
all they're doing is living off the interest of this trust fund, essentially. Is there an argument to be made for going after that money in a sense to try to finance some of this other stuff, like, or because you mentioned meritocracy, because it seems like you're still going to get people rising to the top in a system like this, which isn't a bad thing. But is it still going to create significant disparity,
Ah,
or is it going to create a little less of a disparity because basic needs are met?
I think it's going to be far, far less. And here's why. I'm not so concerned about the finish line. When you talk about a person's wealth, that's the
Mhm,
finish
mhm.
line.
Right.
I'm more concerned about the starting line.
Mhm.
If we're all starting at the same place and some people work harder than me and do a better job and make better decisions, they deserve it 100%. I've got no problem with that.
Does this give you a bit
We
of
don't
a
have the same starting line though. That's the problem.
right? Does this give you a bit of a potential safety net from failure, and could that be problematic? In other words, okay, I even if I come up with this company and it's a spectacular failure and it costs me $500 million when it sinks and I have all of this debt. Doesn't matter. You can't touch my basic standard of living. I just fall back to that and start again.
Mhm.
But I don't know what happens to the $500 million in debt, for example.
It's
Uh,
the same thing that would happen today in a company that does that. It goes bankrupt and debtors either get some money or they get screwed. And the person goes to work at McDonald's for a few years and just survives, right? It's really not that much different. I'm not saying it's good
mhm,
or bad, by the way.
mhm. Right, right, right.
I'm not
Yeah,
putting judgment. I'm just saying I don't think a lot changes um, in that scenario.
yeah.
Um,
So then, do you have? I mean, this is an idea. Or I don't know if I can say if this is entirely your idea, or has there been inspiration from other systems, or what has sort of inspired this thinking around it, or is this kind of your creation?
I don't know what inspired this originally. The only thing I can think of, and this is going to sound really weird and corny, is maybe Star Trek, because
Okay.
there's no money there, right?
Right,
It's
right, right.
everyone's needs are. taken care of, and people just contribute because it's the right thing. And I'm that's the only thing I could think of. Maybe is where it came from. But here's really, I want to throw this on the other way.
Yeah. Okay.
Is there any person, for whatever reason, that deserves to die of starvation?
No.
I don't think so either. No matter, I don't care what they did or didn't do, or I just, if we
Because I
can't
think the
have that
capital
minimum level
punishment
of
argument is a
compassion.
separate discussion.
Exactly, it's totally separate. But I'm
Yes.
talking about, just a human being.
Right.
Should we not have that minimum level of compassion to say, you know what? Even if you're not doing something, even if we think you're a slob and you're lazy and whatever, do you really deserve to die? Starve to
What?
death, especially. Let's.
Yeah. So then here's an
I don't
interesting
know.
thought. If people's basic needs are met, then I think there might be employers might have to pay more because in order to attract you into this job, we have,
Ah,
right?
you're catching on. Yep, yep, yep. There's
Right.
layers to this, but yes, that is
Yeah.
absolutely the case. 100%.
So then we get away from this because you mentioned that quote at the beginning, exorbitant profits or unpaid wages or something along those lines.
Yeah,
Right. So now if work is a choice, you have to actually make it attractive enough that I want to go and work there. So corporate culture dramatically
right.
shifts. So instead of there's a tornado coming, too bad, keep working, you're going to get fired and 6 people die. Or I don't know if that was the exact case, but I think there was somewhere in
It was
Chicago.
about that. Yeah, that sounds about right.
I'm kind of picking on an Amazon plant because I think
Yeah.
they're they're really towing the line when it comes to like almost slave labor, you know. And it's a tough one because boy is it ever convenient. And I think they've introduced even another convenience where if I want to return something, they'll just send a driver to pick it up now. Like
Let's
the
let's be clear about something, John, though. If
yeah.
you're working for a company and you're using the money to pay for food and shelter,
Mhm.
you are in slave labor.
Okay, I
What
think
is your
that's a good way to
alternative? What are
define
you
it.
going to do?
Right.
You're going to go starve? You're going to put your kids on the street?
Mhm. Okay.
You're enslaved. Yeah.
Right. That's a really I think that's a really interesting, albeit I'm sure someone would push back on that, but perspective that if all you can do is buy food and pay rent and maybe pay for a vehicle, yeah, you're enslaved. And your goal is that people have the freedom to be creative. But maybe people have been enslaved for so long that this idea is such a radical notion that they would be scared of it too and be like, no, 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 no. I almost like I without saying it in these words, like I prefer to be enslaved. Do we see that kind of in the psyche of because you
Yeah.
talked about poverty, and again, we wouldn't use those exact words, but is there people who are like, no, no, I'd rather be enslaved because it's easier.
Yes. Yes. And poverty, like what I talked about before, poverty
Mm-mm.
is in the mind. So if we ran this pilot idea, which I really like that you mentioned, if we ran this pilot idea, it would have to be a multi-generational pilot. You couldn't
Right.
just do it for people and say, oh, well, it didn't work for these people. No, no,
Mm-mm.
no. You need to have people brought up in this kind of environment and see
Right.
how they act. So that's very, very key. This would have to be multi-generational for that reason, because of the mindset.
Right. So this couldn't be implemented in like a 5-year time scale potentially. This is
No,
yeah.
no, no. This is a 50-year project if it works or not. 50
Right, right.
years. Yeah.
And so this may or may not be completed in your lifetime. So you better hurry up and
Oh, dude, man,
start.
I'm not planning on dying. Don't worry.
Okay.
I've got too much work to do. I have no time to die. Sorry.
Right. Yeah. So you and Jeff Bezos share something in common then, because
Yeah, I guess so.
he's spending a lot of money on life extension as well, as I understand it. Not yeah, as though I know Jeff, but I mean, yeah, he and I are on
Yeah.
first name basis, right?
Well, I don't have any life extension stuff, but I'm just not planning on dying. To
Yeah.
me, we die when we lose purpose. So I don't see that
Right.
happening. And
You,
who
you're
knows
gonna
though?
you're gonna continue to fight for this, and so
Yeah.
is there a way that you are actually advocating or spreading the message about this and trying to get people on board with this idea to create some kind of momentum behind it?
Not in a serious matter yet. I've just been in the definition stages.
Yep.
But I'm in all kinds of uh, efforts, let's say social
Mhm.
justice wise, that I'm very passionate about. So this is another aspect of it. Um, I need to look around. I need to see who else is talking about this because it might be worth leveraging efforts. I don't know. I
Right,
haven't
where you
done that.
create, I mean, you could start with a website, minimumstandardofliving.com, and say,
True.
you know,
I better do it before anyone figures it out or hears about this.
right. And then start to leveraging any sort of political friendships that you have and whatnot.
Yeah.
Because one of the challenges is this sort of aspect of human nature, where how do we get people to the place where they stop treating everyone else as competition, and where they realize that, okay, and this isn't about like lazy or not, and so on, where
Right.
it's like, so it's convincing because you have there's a billionaire out of Seattle, and I forget what his name is now, but he's done all these talks on like tax us more. I'm not going to pay more tax voluntarily, but make this law to tax us more, and fighting for like a certain minimum wage and so on. But I can't think of the guy's name.
Sounds like a Howard Schultz kind of person, but I don't know if that's
Yeah,
who you're
it's not
talking
Howard
about.
Schultz, but and he had a TED talk, something like "The Pitchforks Are Coming," I think was maybe the name of his TED talk a few years back, and it was this idea that like pay people like a living wage kind of thing. Because I couldn't imagine like trying to go and work for $15 an hour at this point in time.
No.
Thankfully I don't have to. I'm grateful I don't have to. But the thought of that, I'm like, I actually couldn't. The cost of living in Canada, where I live in Canada, is such that I actually on $15 an hour could not support my family. There's just no way
Yeah.
on earth. Yeah.
And think about all the stuff that you're bringing to the world right now that you wouldn't be able to do because
Right.
even if you had the time to do it, you wouldn't have the resources, the
Mhm.
mentality, the attitude. Like it would just working your job or two jobs if you had to, that would just
Yeah,
it'd weigh you down.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, so then just to try to sort of bring this home, um, this is a 50-year project, at least.
Pilot. This is the 50-year
50-year
pilot.
pilot. Right.
Yeah.
And there's a huge psyche shift that needs to happen. So like there's the educational advocacy, getting into schools and saying we need to teach you about these things, you know, about these
Yes.
things that really matter. Teaching people what is a mortgage, what is this and that, and so on. Um, so there's that element to it. So you have the educational aspect to it, you have the political aspect to it, you have the, I guess, the financial aspect to it. So taking money out of a defense budget and using it to build affordable housing, or housing that people don't pay for, but the, I guess, the upkeep is somehow paid for. Um, any pieces of this that we've missed yet?
No, I think that so, but we shouldn't gloss over the meritocracy piece simply
Right.
because uh, this is the psyche shift that has to happen. We have to, the people that think, well, I worked hard and, but yeah, you also had parents that had means, right? So
Hmm,
you
hmm.
came from a two parent home and you've got these, they weren't broke. So they were
Hmm.
able to send you to college. So, but we don't tend to think of those as things that helped us. Like I worked hard for what I have. We need to get past this psyche, this idea, this fear of meritocracy, because that's kind of what it is. We're kind of afraid, people that have privilege like me. I'm the poster child of privilege. You
Right.
name it, I've got it. I'm the poster child. All right. So if anything, I should be afraid of people getting an equal shot because that means I'm going to have to, not that I didn't work hard, but I'm going to have to work harder. I'm going to have to step up my game because all these privileges, white, male, heterosexual, blah, 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 you name it, has given me a leg up, whether I ask for it or not.
Hmm, hmm.
It's given me a leg up in society. So that's the big psyche that's got to change. Otherwise, it's never going to go anywhere. This will never get off the ground if we don't accept that.
So then, yeah, because I guess I keep thinking about the argument, but it's like I guess you changing the starting line. So something like putting a dip in the curb so that someone in a wheelchair can get onto the sidewalk doesn't necessarily make it worse for you. Somebody else getting access to more resources doesn't somehow take it out of your pocket because we have
Correct.
such an abundance of resources. And then I think about, well, if we could implement this in like the wealthiest country in the world, could this be implemented elsewhere? Could this be a pilot project in this country to be looked at other, or there could be a simultaneous pilot project, like even globally. Is that something like the World Economic Forum, with because they're subject to a lot. There's another rabbit hole. They're subject to a lot of conspiracy talk because you have all these rich people coming together that that the phrase "you'll own nothing and be happy."
Yeah.
Uh, is this a case of like, hey, under your minimum standard of living, it's not a home that you own, but you don't have to pay for it?
Correct. Correct. So you're not building generational wealth through the MSOL. That's
Right.
that's not happening unless you work.
Right.
So that's the delineator, right? That All I want to do is create the same starting line for everybody. Now,
Okay.
what you do with it from there, if you don't want to run in the race, don't
Mhm.
run in the race. Stay at the starting line, perfectly fine. But you're not going to freaking starve to death on my watch. You're not going
Right.
to like go hungry in the first world country we have. That's all. Right now, you want to enter the race and you want to go run. I'll clap for you. Go for it. Run. Build wealth. Pass it on to your family. Have a wonderful life. Right, and that's
Mm.
fine. But
Right.
this is the starting line thing is what gets people in a rough spot. It ruffles their feathers when they
Right.
think that, wait a minute, everyone's going to have equal opportunity to succeed. Like, yes. They're like,
Right.
shit. They
So
don't
now that
know it.
now,
Deep down, it's subconscious for them. That
right.
subconsciously they're like, ah, crap.
I'm gonna have to work a little
Right?
harder.
Yeah. Because someone out there who can't afford food, who's starving, who's just struggling, they're probably better at me at something.
Right.
Right. Or there's someone better at me at my job or my business or what I do.
Right. But I mean,
And
and I mean, there's a whole conversation around limiting beliefs, right? Because I think
correct.
everybody has some kind of zone of genius that can be tapped into and best utilized, and we shouldn't necessarily be afraid of it. So, um, well, this is like a just a fascinating discussion, and I feel like we've barely scratched the surface of it because there's
Barely, man, barely.
the
But you know what drives me? You asked before. I'll add one more thing to it.
mm,
Yeah, Star Trek maybe inspired it. I don't really know anymore. It's been a while, but my vision is very clear. I want to see a world of personal free trade. You do
mm,
what you do best. I do what I do best. And because we're in our lane, we're really providing value in the best way we can. We create surplus. And when we create surplus, we have to share. And
mhm.
when we do that, scarcity goes away. And without scarcity, there can't be hunger, homelessness, racism, hate, all the scarcity driven things. That's honestly what really pulls me forward. This is just a piece of it.
Right. Yeah. And this is even what you're doing with your work. And so maybe just for again people who might be tuning in a little bit late or hopping in after the fact, where can people find you and learn more about what it is that you do?
JoshZepess.com is the website, or find me on social media. I'm the only one with my name, so you won't get confused with anyone else. Either at Josh Zepess, or you'll see the Identity Archaeologist out there somewhere.
Right. That's a very unique brand. If you're just take it home with maybe some words of wisdom from what we've discussed today, if you could just encourage people to maybe become a little bit more a part of the solution that you'd like to see, how would you encourage people?
The first thing I would say is uh, get clarity. Get clarity on your own purpose before you start trying to influence others. Get clear on why you exist. Take that
Mm,
thing that drives you, that the reason why you get out of bed every morning. Find out what that is, other than money, right? So
hmm
put money aside. Find the non-monetary reason why you do what you do, and go bring that to the world and go influence people in that way, because that's how we're going to do it. Because then when you do that, the scarcity mindset starts to melt away.
hmm
That's what gets us out of our loop and our fear of meritocracy. Because when we shine and when we're secure in what we do and the value we provide to the world, we're no longer worried about other people doing the same. In fact, we
mm.
want other people to do the same. And when we all have that mindset, that's where we're going to be able to implement the MSOL.
That's awesome. I love it. Well, Josh, thank you so much for being on tonight. It's been
My
an
pleasure.
absolute pleasure, and I look forward to when
We
we
got to
get to
do it
chat
again,
next.
man. We got to go
Oh,
deeper next time.
well, here's what we'll do just as we close this out. I'm going to bring you back. I'm going to make sure like I drag Chris and Dylan and Kyle and Lamar into this conversation, because I think I would love to get some of these other brilliant brains tapping into this idea and chewing on it a
Definitely.
little bit more. So Chris, Dylan, Lamar, Kyle, if you were listening to this and didn't show up, you missed out on a great conversation and a great opportunity to explore what I think is a very, very intriguing idea, and I would love to see implemented. So thank you again, Josh.
My pleasure, John.
Thank you so much for tuning into It's Not So Black and White. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, or leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach more people. It's fascinating to explore the thoughts and minds of those who see the world differently. We don't have to agree on everything in order to engage in civil discourse. So I hope this podcast inspires you to have an open mind and a willingness to see things from another perspective. In this, we can create a hopeful future moving forward.
Whatever your belief system, go and investigate it. Like really dig down into it, and you can only benefit from really thinking deeply about why you believe something.